Hey guys, this is miicrow here. I wanted to make a kind of quick video about some exploits that have come out, as well as some kind of new discoveries in terms of like the 700 versus 725 Gearscore race, and kind of where that leaves the majority of the player base at the moment. So there have been some exploits that have started to pop up that I feel like I need to talk about now that they're public. There's one exploit here that I'll just show off the bat that this is a bow one with heavy attacks where you could spam light attacks. This is a faster heavy attack spam than you actually can do traditionally and that you've ever been able to do in New World. Some people might recall me saying there was a bug so bad that I didn't want to reveal it to people, and I'm usually one that reveals stuff to people, and I said that this is actually an exploit, and most other things in comparison are like not even close to how impactful this is. This exploit alone like increases the bow DPS by like 3 to 4 times and just makes bow hard meta in every single environment, and can be replicated without a macro, but at the end of the day mostly needs a macro. This is something I was going to wait to reveal until the Halloween patch went away, because that's when AGS often fixes a lot of exploits, and I sent AGS a email to their exploits group talking about this bug because I thought it was so bad and it needed to be addressed, and I sent that like 12 days ago. Had video evidence of it happening, had a list of things that caused it, sent them a macro of how to do it, and I heard absolutely nothing back, and I am not convinced that AGS is taking action upon it, and this is usually when I resort to kind of sharing things publicly, because at the end of the day, if there's an exploit out and AGS isn't going to fix it and people are using it, it makes sense to make the playing field fair to some extent and just let everyone know that this exists, how to do it, and just like it I didn't want to do this because it just fucks up the game until AGS fixes it, but it seems like the hand is forced now that 2k plus people have seen this exploit now and now know how to do it. So it seems like we kind of have to come clean about it. I did not see people in the PvP side of the game using this exploit yet, and I'm like someone that is in a decent amount of PvP discords and like to monitor those things, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't make this public. Like, instantly when people start using this bug in a PvP aspect, I feel like my hand's forced and I have to make the exploit. But I reached out to AGS through multiple paths, heard nothing back. Now it's publicly out there. I could say I told you so, and this would be a really big issue, and there's nothing I have power to do about it, and it's very frustrating because AGS once again isn't really listening to feedback at all, and not taking even like the most serious of like complaints seriously at this point. One thing that's always bizarre about New World is that macros are not allowed by TOS, but they're not enforced. So a lot of like the exploits result from doing macros. One of those that's on this list that hasn't been shown here is there's a hatchet exploit where you can basically go light attack, go for a range throw, and then go light attack by canceling that range throw really quickly with an exploit. It works very, very similarly to this bow one, where this bow one you're going for basically a heavy attack and then you're canceling your pen, or like, and a few other abilities work with this as well. And that's just allowing you to spam those heavies even faster. That is a similar thing that works with the hatchet, and it's something that people are using to get that really stupid cracking on the hatchet, which is causing a lot of issues in the PvP scene, because there's literally no way to escape from the hatchet right now. You can go rapier, you could try to use movement to get away, it will still stick to you while you're trying to move away, because the tracking is that overtuned, and it does not seem super balanced. There's another exploit that I've told AGS about where that involves a heart rune, like vines specifically, and if you use it in the correct order, it allows you to use your heavy attacks 2 to 3 times as fast as normal, and people were using this on the FFA island within the first day of the New World build coming out, and they were just doing absurd things with heavy attacks, particularly on Warhammer. This is something I haven't been able to replicate, but I've seen video evidence of people having it done against them while I was in like a Discord watching their point of view, like they were fighting somebody and they were using it, and it's crazy that that's something that's kind of allowed in the game as well. most of these result, again, from a very common theme where macros are not being enforced from an AGS side. And they're not being banned, like people aren't being banned for using macros. And that just doesn't make sense to me. Like they're against the terms of service. I think the only spot where they're like kind of excusable is from like tedious tasks. Like if you want to open up 400 Asmo boxes, you could use a macro and press one button and then open up 400 of them in like a few minutes, or you could open them up individually and your finger will hurt after. Like that's an aspect where it's like a macro improves the quality of life, but that it comes back to AGS doesn't have an open all button, which should be a feature, especially for like console players. It doesn't make sense for that to not be a feature because you're literally just sitting there opening up boxes. So like there's a difference between like, I guess, PvE oriented, like crafting oriented, because it doesn't affect the actual gameplay of anything overall, versus something like this where you're just spamming heavy attacks over and over and over again. But this was not documented by me at first. I can shout out the guy that like documented the first fix. Well, actually, he didn't even. It was an unlisted video. How many views did it get? It got 79 views when I shared this to AGS. It had 40 views at the time. So like people came out, showed AGS that this was an exploit. Hey, you need to fix this. AGS did nothing about it, and here we are 2 weeks later with the entire community knowing about this exploit, and AGS has done nothing about it, and it's super, super frustrating from someone that's like trying to avoid talking about like the negative parts about New World recently. Like this is probably my first negative video on New World in probably 3 weeks, but it's again a common theme with AGS where they don't really listen to feedback unless their hand is forced, and I know they've made talks about listening to community feedback, but it just does not feel that way. Especially when something like this would be what I would consider to be a blocking issue, or something like you need to fix it immediately or else the game is unplayable. Like since this exploit's been shown, if you are a bow player who's trying to get slotted into a war and you don't use this exploit, you're not going to get slotted, because this increases your DPS output so much that it doesn't make sense to slot you compared to another bow. Like another bow that's using this exploit is literally doing 2 to 3 times as much damage as you are per second. Like why would you ever slot someone that's not cheating? And that's the part that like doesn't make sense to me. There's not usually ramifications for this, and this is something that should be very easily trackable by AGS and something that they could just basically auto ban for. Like there's not a lot of like need to review for these kind of things, and it's just confusing to me. The other confusing part too is like there's been a big stress on making the playing field even for console players and PC players, right? Console players can't use macros. Like it's not a thing unless they have third-party accessories like the Zim, and then they card code a macro into the Zim. But that's like very, very weird and like out of the way to do. So I don't understand why they would ever be a double standard, and why AGS would prioritize PC players over console players in that aspect. Like make the playing field even, make the game about skill expression. Don't make it about like what you know. Like that's been a big thing for me, and it's been very, very frustrating. Another thing like this that's like a similar thing, but I'd say it's a little bit less severe, is there's a bug with a specific gem that's existed for a year now, and it's still in the game, where if you use an electrified carnelian gem on tank, I don't know why it's that one specifically, and you use an ability like Shield Rush or Shield Bash, this triggers a passive that gives you 15 stam every single time the dot ticks on the rune glass. So this guy uses 2 abilities in this case. He's able to get his stamina back to full, and this just kind of caters towards invincible tank builds. This is something that's like, again, in that spot where it's like, if you're not doing it, you're just playing at a disadvantage. So like once people know this, like they should basically always be doing this as a tank, and it's super frustrating because things like this should be taken out of the game so that people can have more creativity with their builds and aren't forced into like some aspect where they have to do something, or they won't be as competitive as someone else that is cheating. And that's something that, again, AGS tends to feel like they cater towards. So that's like kind of the sour part of the video today. Now I want to talk about something that I'm actually very happy about from AGS's side, and I think it's completely unintentional, and it's a really beautiful oversight in terms of the PvP community that we kind of came together and figured this out. So we basically have figured out what the difference is between 700 and 725 gear score, and it's not big. So if you have 700 gear score armor versus a full set of 725 gear score armor, you're going to be only taking like 1 to 1.5% more damage than if you had full 725. At that point, it's actually not BIS to go full 725 because there's illegal gear pieces that you can farm in PvE, like the Frigid Dawn this week that drops with Enchanted Ward and Elemental Aversion. this is something that you can get, and because you can't normally get these pieces together, this is a better perk option than anything you can get at 725. So AGS like basically accidentally made old content better than new content in terms of the damage mitigation that's coming from it. Another thing that's similar to this I've been getting asked a lot is what's the difference between 725 weapons and 700 weapons. There's an EU company that figured that one out today, and the difference is effectively about 3.3%. So it's a bit of a bigger difference. Like I'd say if you're going to maximize on one thing, get one thing to 725, try to get your weapons up to 725, but it doesn't seem to, again, play a huge impact in the DPS output of the weapons. So in this case, there are a few old weapons that actually might be better than new weapons. And particularly, I'm thinking of a fire staff that some of you guys may remember that dropped from the PvP track that had Alacritus Punishment on it, called the Flint Stick. This Flint Stick came with Vicious and it came with Alacritus Punishment. You normally can't get these two perks together, but because you were able to get these together and you're able to upgrade this staff to 700 Gearscore, this just allowed you to be in a better spot competitively, because you could end up with a weapon that just did significantly more damage because you had Vicious and Alacritus Punishment on the same weapon. This is something that I think could be used this patch as well, and then for the last perk on here, you can either go the new PvP perk or the new PvE perk if you're like more dot focused on fire staff, and that would result in a DPS boost compared to a 725 weapon you previously can get. So there are some of these weapons that have illegal pieces that are very, very good to farm. If you've been paying attention to global chat recently, you see a lot of people saying X life ring. There is a life ring rapier, for example, that has Vicious and Rogue. You normally can't get these together. This is going to be, this damage boost from this illegal perk combination, which we call illegal because you normally can't roll this, will be greater than a 3.3% increase that you'll get from going from 700 to 725 Gearscore. So it makes sense to slot something like this into your arsenal if you're looking to maximize DPS in a rapier. So there's a lot of common themes around this. The high level of this is like Frigid Dawn becomes very meta relevant again. I would argue Frigid Dawn's actually better than a lot of these 725 gear pieces, and this is something you can get this week. There's a ton of ways to get 700 gear score options right now. There's only a few ways to get 725, being the raid, the PvP area, an OPR box from once a week, and just like the balloon caches basically. There's not another great way to get 725. I mean, both raids, I guess, too. But 700 gear score, like, you have plenty of avenues to get this gear, and it's all, like, pretty good to some extent. So you can get this gear from, like, mutations, which is something that a lot of people have talked about in terms of, like, being upset that they've gone away. You can get this from OPR. You can get this from chest runs. You can get this from the majority of the content within the game, and this gear will be basically as good, if not better, than the 725 gear score in most cases. So from a newer player perspective, or players that like don't want to grind as much perspective, don't feel that bad about not having 725. If you're preventing someone from getting into a mutation or something like that, or some endgame content between 725 gear score, like, it physically does not matter. The gear score scaling isn't really much of a thing in PvE anymore, and as long as people have high enough gear score to be like decent, it doesn't seem to have a big impact in these endgame activities. So there's a lot of stuff like this that has like ramifications from the actual damage values and the introduction values not being as good. And this was done with in-game testing by various people, and I think is overall a really good thing for the game, because that means you have a lot more avenues to get better gear. You have a lot more different gear options, so you have a lot more variety, and because it's a lot easier to get that gear, it could create a greater diversity of builds in the game. The downside of this is this effectively eliminates any grind that is needed from the last year's worth of gear and the current year's worth of gear, so it might not be worth it to, like, if you're thinking about, oh, I want to have pure bis, like, it might not be pure bis to play through this year's worth of content, assuming that AGS fails to deliver on a roadmap in the near future and continues their previous trends of putting out content once per year. Then it might, like, this year is in theory a passable year, because the gear score from the year prior that was illegal, aka you can get it from PvE and dropped with the perk combination that didn't make sense, may be better than the 725 gear score that you can actually get from the game currently. So kind of two different themes there in this video. One's a little bit more sour. We're having some exploits kind of pop up again, and people are starting to abuse them. I will try to keep those as public as I can. The main reason why I didn't want to reveal this one is because I think this literally makes the game unplayable for any bow user that's not using the exploit, and that completely gatekeeps console players. And it also is just like really, really bad from a community standpoint overall. That half the community would be cheating and half the community wouldn't, and the community, the part that's cheating, likely won't get punished for this, and it sets a really bad precedent from a AGS standpoint, and it's very, very frustrating. And then the other part of this too is that Gearscore seems to be less bad. The way that we figured this out is we found the difference between a Gearscore piece and used that to estimate what the difference between the armor delta would be between 725 and 700 Gearscore. So basically just use proportions to figure this out. And 725 doesn't seem as mandatory as a lot of people thought it would be. So with that being said, let me know what you guys think. If there are exploits that you guys are aware of that AGS isn't addressing, I imagine AGS will watch this video at some point because it has a decent amount of controversial topics, so please try to make them visible in the comments, because there might be a way to kind of get those fast-tracked at this point. And I'm hoping that AGS can kind of continue their kind of early success here with the console launch and just kind of deliver on the expectations that I think everyone has set for them to make like a good game at this point that is less full of kind of bugs / exploits that they've kind of been pushing for the last year. Like there's been a lot of delay in the amount of bug fixes, a lot of delay in the amount of exploits for the last half year. Got a lot of people frustrated. Was one of the main reasons why people kind of didn't play the game as much in the last 6 months before this update. And AGS is kind of pushing it off, saying, wait for the update, wait for the update. We fixed all these, and it seems like a lot of the bugs that are coming back are similar or the exact same as bugs that were patched previously. So I'm looking forward to AGS maybe trying to figure out what bugs that they have reintroduced and kind of having quick ways to patch those, because they've already worked their way through the system once before. And with that being said, I will see you guys later. Peace.